At 12:41 a.m., Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 left the gate in Kuala Lumpur. Nothing about the flight stood out. The aircraft was serviceable, the crew was experienced, the route was routine. 38 minutes later, the flight disappeared from the sky.
Malaysia 370, Kuala Lumpur Control. We cannot see you anymore. Radar contact is gone. Please talk back to us immediately.
Not lost, simply disappeared. For more than a decade, investigators collected radar records, satellite data, drift analyses, and debris, yet no confirmed crash site, and no explanation that fully held up. This video focuses on what that investigation produced in its most recent phase, the findings reassessed in 2025, and what they change in our understanding.
Flight MH370 ended in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
This is very rare. For an airplane to disappear is not normal.
Traffic control lost contact with the plane about 2 hours after takeoff.
Before we walk through those 11 years step by step, we need to do one thing. We need to go back to where it started, to the night when Flight 370 pushed back from the gate. Everything looked normal, and the most mysterious disappearance in modern aviation began. It is the night of March 8th, 2014. The time at Kuala Lumpur International Airport is just after midnight. Most of the terminal is quiet. Shops are closing, cleaning staff move through empty seating areas. On the departure boards, one long-haul flight still stands out. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Destination, Beijing. The aircraft is a Boeing 777-200 extended range, registration 9 Mike Romeo Oscar. It is a long-haul workhorse. 2 large engines, twin aisle cabin, range to cross continents and oceans. The type has an excellent safety record. Inside the terminal, passengers start to gather at the gate. There are business travelers, families, couples, and tour groups. Many are Chinese citizens returning from holidays or business trips in Malaysia. Some are Malaysian passengers heading to Beijing for work, study, or onward connections. In total, 227 passengers and 12 crew members will board. On the flight deck, the captain and first officer prepare. The captain is 53 years old with more than 18,000 hours of flight time, including over 8,000 on the Boeing 777. He is one of the most senior pilots at the airline, a training captain and a simulator instructor. The first officer is 27, relatively early in his jet career, but fully qualified on the type, building hours under supervision. They review the route to Beijing, a night departure heading northeast over the Gulf of Thailand, then across Vietnamese airspace, past the coast, and up towards Chinese territory. The weather forecast is good. No major storms, no severe turbulence, nothing that should make this flight special. The aircraft has fuel for the trip, plus reserves. Weight and balance are within limits. No major technical issues are noted in the maintenance log. From every angle, this is just another overnight long-haul flight. Boarding begins. Passengers scan their boarding passes and walk down the jet bridge into the cabin. Flight attendants greet them at the door. Some people head left into business class, most turn right, filling economy seats in a 3-3-3 layout. Bags go into overhead bins. Mobile phones take last photos. Seatbelts click shut, doors close. The jet bridge is pulled back. The cabin crew arm the slides and take their positions. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 pushes back from the gate at about 12:41 in the early hours of March 8th. There is nothing on board that tells anyone this will be the last time this aircraft is ever seen.
After pushback, the 777 taxis out to the runway, the captain receives clearance for departure and lines up. At around 12:42, the aircraft begins its takeoff roll. The engines spool up, thrust builds, and the jet accelerates down the runway. The first officer calls out the speeds, rotate, the nose lifts. The main gear leaves the ground, positive rate of climb, landing gear up. In the cabin, the feeling is familiar to anyone who flies at night. The push into the seat, the vibration as wheels leave concrete, the slight angle as the aircraft climbs into darkness. The departure is uneventful. Climb continues. The crew contact Kuala Lumpur Departure Control, then climb to a cruising level. The 777 stabilizes at its planned flight level, heading northeast towards the Gulf of Thailand. In the cockpit, checklists are completed. The crew talk briefly with air traffic control, confirm their route, and settle in for a night flight of about 6 hours. At 1:19 in the morning, as the aircraft approaches the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, the controller in Kuala Lumpur tells Flight 370 to contact the next sector. The first officer responds with a short, routine phrase. It is the last confirmed voice communication from the aircraft. "Good night, Malaysian 370. From the point of view of air traffic control, everything is normal. The aircraft's label on the radar screen shows correct altitude and speed. The transponder is working. The handover to Vietnam should be simple. Inside the cabin, the seatbelt signs are likely off. Some passengers may already be asleep. Others watch films, read, or play games. Flight attendants tidy the aisles and prepare for the quiet part of the night. No one in the cabin feels anything unusual. The real story of Flight 370 is about to begin, and no one on board knows it. In most modern airspace, controllers track aircraft using two main tools. One is primary radar. It sends out a radio pulse and listens for an echo from the metal body of an aircraft. That gives a basic point in space, but no identity. The second, more important tool is a transponder. The aircraft's equipment receives a radar request and replies with information, flight number, altitude, and a special code. This is what turns an anonymous dot into a labeled symbol on the screen. Shortly after the final good night call, something happens. On civilian radar screens, the transponder return from Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappears. The label vanishes. The clear altitude and code information drop away. If you were watching only that system, it would look as if the aircraft had just left the display. At almost the same time, another system stops sending routine information. Airlines use a data link system to send automatic reports from aircraft back to company servers and maintenance. On Flight 370, this system stops transmitting normal messages shortly after the last voice call. It is as if someone either pulled a plug or changed a setting that stopped those reports from going out. To a controller in Kuala Lumpur or Ho Chi Minh that night, this does not immediately look like a hijack or a catastrophe. Radar systems are imperfect. Transponders can fail. Radio checks can be missed. Procedures say, call the aircraft, check with the next sector, then raise alarms if there is no response. In the next few minutes, those calls start. Vietnamese controllers try to make contact with Flight 370. They receive no answer. They ask Kuala Lumpur if they still see the aircraft. Confusion grows. Each side thinks the other is in contact. While this is happening, something else is going on that no one in civilian control rooms can see. The aircraft has not vanished. It has turned. Military radar, which can see raw returns without relying on a transponder reply, later shows that Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 made a sharp turn back over the Malaysian peninsula. Instead of continuing northeast towards Vietnam, the jet banked, flew back across the country, and then turned northwest along a route that took it out over the Andaman Sea. It passed near known reporting points, at altitudes that were entirely compatible with a large jet under control. It did not descend into a rapid dive, it did not break apart in mid-air, it flew. But as far as civil air traffic control was concerned, there was nothing more than an unresolved radio check and a missing transponder symbol, no mayday, no hijack code, no call saying there was smoke, decompression, or anything else. A 6-hour flight had just become an unsolved problem on a radar screen. By the time it is clear that no one is talking to Flight 370, the aircraft has already left the area where ground-based radar can see it. For a period of time, the only people who know that something is seriously wrong are controllers in Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh, and a small group of duty officers in Malaysia Airlines Operations Centre. At first, the airline's response is cautious. Safety procedures require them to check fuel loads, possible diversions, and any chance that the aircraft might have landed somewhere without telling air traffic control. Internally, people start making calls. To Beijing, to other airports, to different control centres. On paper, the flight is still in the air. There is no confirmed accident. Families in Beijing are still asleep or on their way to the airport. No one outside the system has any idea that something is happening. As the hours pass, the options begin to close. If the aircraft had suffered a technical failure in the first part of the flight, it would have crashed within a certain range. Search areas are discussed. Plans are drawn up to look in the South China Sea, along the route to Beijing, but the lack of any wreckage, any distress calls, and any clear radar track in that area starts to unsettle the picture. It is only later, when military radar data is fully reviewed, that investigators understand how far from the original plan the aircraft actually went. For now, in the early hours of March 8th, the most honest description is the simplest. A large passenger jet has gone missing. The most important clue in the entire MH370 case did not come from a radar screen, a cockpit recording, or a piece of wreckage. It came from a satellite in geostationary orbit and a system that was not even designed to track aircraft minute by minute. The aircraft's data link equipment was connected to a satellite network used mainly for things like sending maintenance information and text messages to and from the cockpit. When that system is active, the aircraft and the satellite periodically exchange short automated signals to maintain the connection. After Flight 370 went silent to air traffic control, and after its transponder stopped sending information, something remained alive for a while. This automatic link between the aircraft and the satellite. For about 7 hours after the last voice transmission, the satellite recorded a series of so-called handshakes from the aircraft. They were not full messages with position and speed. They were essentially pings. Are you there? Yes, I am here. Each of these signals contained two pieces of information that would become crucial. The first was the time it took for the signal to travel from the aircraft to the satellite and back. Because the speed of radio waves is constant, this gave investigators a measure of how far from the satellite the aircraft was at each handshake. Plot these distances on a map, and you do not get a single point. You get a ring of possible positions, a curved line, an arc where the aircraft could have been at that time. The second was a subtle shift in the frequency of the signal caused by the relative motion of the aircraft and the satellite. This is related to the Doppler effect, the same principle that makes a passing siren sound higher as it approaches and lower as it moves away. By analyzing that frequency shift, investigators could estimate whether the aircraft was moving towards or away from the satellite along each arc. At the time, this use of satellite handshake data to reconstruct a flight path had never been done in an accident investigation. Teams in the satellite company and in international investigation groups spent months checking and rechecking the mathematics. What they found, when they combined the timing arcs and the frequency information, was a pattern. After turning back across Malaysia and heading northwest, the aircraft appears to have turned south, flown out over the Indian Ocean, and then continued on a broadly southerly track for hours until the final handshake, when fuel would have been close to exhaustion. The last of these handshakes, sometimes called the seventh arc, represents a line on the map where the aircraft likely was when it made its final contact with the satellite. Somewhere along that arc in the southern Indian Ocean, Flight 370 is believed to have descended into the sea. That entire reconstruction is not based on normal tracking systems, not on radio calls, not on radar, but on a background function of a satellite communications network that no one expected to carry the weight of an entire investigation. For many viewers, this is the point where the story becomes more like a detective case than a conventional crash. We have no flight recorders. We have no confirmed wreckage on the seabed. We have a set of curved lines, some timing data, and the knowledge that a jet fueled for around 7 hours of flight could not stay in the air forever. Whenever a flight disappears, the first question is always, what went wrong? With MH370, almost every simple answer breaks under the weight of the data. If this had been a rapid, catastrophic failure, such as an explosion or a major structural breakup near the last known position, there would have been floating wreckage in the South China Sea within hours. Ships and aircraft from multiple countries searched that area intensively in the days after March 8th. They saw nothing that matched the size, pattern, or distribution of a large passenger jet breaking up near the surface. If this had been a straightforward hijacking to a known location, the aircraft would have needed enough fuel and a runway long enough to land unnoticed. No such landing has ever been confirmed, and the satellite handshake data does not fit a controlled flight to a normal airport. If this had been a simple case of an unresponsive crew, with the aircraft continuing on autopilot along its planned route until fuel exhaustion, the crash would have occurred along or near the original path to Beijing, not deep in the southern Indian Ocean. The satellite data, the military radar track, and the absence of wreckage near the planned route all point to something else. At some point after the last voice call, someone on the flight deck or someone who gained access to flight deck systems appears to have disabled the transponder, stopped normal automatic reports, turned the aircraft off its assigned course, and flown an alternative route for an extended period. Whether that person was the captain, the first officer, someone forcing them, or someone acting in cooperation with them is a separate question, and one that has fueled discussion for a decade. The official reports are careful. they stop short of naming a culprit or giving a final motive. They do, however, state clearly that the changes in heading and altitude in the early part of the diversion were almost certainly made by a human, not by a random mechanical fault. From a pure data point of view, Flight 370 was not a victim of a single sudden malfunction. It was a flight that continued under some form of control for hours after it stopped talking. In the immediate days after the disappearance, none of this was fully understood. Governments and search agencies had to act on what they knew then, not on what the satellite data would reveal months later. The first assumption, based on the last known air traffic control position and the planned route, was that the aircraft had gone down somewhere in the South China Sea or the Gulf of Thailand. Navies and coast guards from multiple countries deployed ships and aircraft to comb that area. They flew visual search patterns, scanned the water with radar, and looked for any sign of floating debris, oil slicks, or life rafts. Nothing that could be confirmed as part of Flight 370 was found. As days went by with no credible debris, attention began to shift. The military radar data showing the turn across Malaysia was brought into the investigation. The satellite company began to share its handshake logs. The idea that the aircraft had gone far to the south, not northeast, started to take hold. To families who had been told to watch the South China Sea, this was a shock. The search zone moved thousands of kilometers away. The possibility that their relatives' last moments took place not in crowded regional shipping lanes, but in some of the loneliest waters on Earth, began to sink in. For the investigators, the scale of the problem suddenly expanded. Instead of a relatively small area near busy coasts, they now faced a band of ocean thousands of kilometers long, with depths of 4,000 meters or more in places, fierce weather, and almost no existing mapping of the seabed. The disappearance of MH370 had just become not only an aviation mystery, but a logistical and scientific one. How do you find a single aircraft on the bottom of an ocean when all you have is an arc, some timing data, and no wreckage at the surface? The answer to that question would shape the rest of 2014 and the years that followed. And that is where the timeline of our investigation really begins. Not with the last words from the cockpit, but with the first serious attempts to narrow down the search area in one of the most remote parts of the planet. The Indian Ocean was just a blue shape on a map. By the end of March, it had become the center of the biggest and most expensive search in aviation history. But the search did not start there. It started in the wrong place. In the hours after Flight 370 vanished from radar, the most obvious assumption drove the response. Last known position, somewhere over the South China Sea. Planned route, Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Logical conclusion, the aircraft must have gone down somewhere along that line, so ships and aircraft were sent there. Navies from Malaysia, Vietnam, China, and other countries fanned out over the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea. Long-range patrol aircraft flew parallel tracks over the water. Crews stared down from windows for hours, scanning for life rafts, seat cushions, wreckage, oil slicks. Helicopters orbited suspected patches of floating debris that turned out to be fishing gear and trash. Radar plots were rechecked. Controllers from Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh went back through recordings. The airline tried to account for every possibility: a diversion, a landing at some remote strip, an error in the radar handover. At the same time, another detail quietly caught attention. 2 passengers on the manifest had boarded with stolen passports. For a few days, that became the focus. Headlines around the world lit up with speculation about terrorism and hijack. Investigators tracked the men down through security footage and intelligence channels. The story turned out to be more ordinary than sinister. They were asylum seekers trying to reach Europe, not known extremists. The stolen passports were a problem for border security, not the key to the disappearance. Meanwhile, hours were passing, and the South China Sea stayed empty. On the 15th of March, 8 days after the flight vanished, the case pivoted. Malaysia's Prime Minister stepped in front of cameras in Kuala Lumpur and revealed something the public had not heard before. The aircraft had stayed in contact with a communications satellite for hours after it vanished from normal radar. Those background handshakes, the pings between the aircraft's satellite terminal and the satellite high above the equator, showed that Flight 370 had not simply fallen into the ocean near its last known radio call. It had flown on for a long time. Analysts had taken the times of those handshakes and calculated how far the aircraft was from the satellite at each one. That gave them a series of possible positions, arcs on the globe. When they plotted those arcs, they saw 2 possible corridors. One corridor bent northwest across Asia towards places like Kazakhstan. The other curved south into empty Indian Ocean. At that press conference, the Prime Minister announced both corridors. Almost immediately, the northern option began to fall apart. Countries along that corridor checked their military and civil radars. None of them saw an unidentified Boeing 777 crossing their airspace any time after the last known Malaysian military radar return. The idea that a wide-body jet could cross that many borders at cruising altitude in peacetime without being seen was extremely hard to reconcile with reality. That left the Southern Corridor, a long, lonely swathe of ocean far off the west coast of Australia, an area that one Australian leader later described as about as close to nowhere as it is possible to be. The search had just moved thousands of kilometers away into some of the harshest waters on the planet. There was one more clue that might still be alive in the deep. Every modern airliner is fitted with 2 recorders, a cockpit voice recorder and a flight data recorder. Both have underwater locator beacons attached to them. When those beacons are immersed in water, they begin to emit a regular acoustic ping at a specific frequency. The catch: the batteries are only rated for around 30 to 40 days. MH370 vanished on the 8th of March. By early April, the clock on those beacons was almost at its limit. Search teams rushed to get listening equipment into the likely area along what investigators now called the 7th Arc, the last known satellite handshake line in the southern Indian Ocean. Australian authorities took the lead for this part of the search. Long-range patrol aircraft dropped sonar buoys that floated on the surface and listened below. A specialist ship towed a device called a pinger locator, essentially an underwater microphone tuned to hear the beacon frequency. Other vessels with advanced sonar capability headed to the same area. The weather was brutal. Swells rolled through the search zone, often several meters high. Winds whipped spray across decks. Just getting equipment into the water and keeping it at the right depth was a challenge. Search planes flew for hours from Western Australia just to reach the area, search for a short period, and then return. On some days, they heard things. Short bursts in the right frequency range, picked up by underwater listening gear. Hopes spiked. News media around the world ran headlines about pings that could be from MH370's black boxes. Ships slowed to crawling speed over those spots. A small autonomous submarine called Bluefin 21 was deployed to map the seabed around them with sonar. If the signals really were from the recorders, the logic went, the wreckage had to be nearby. Dive after dive, Bluefin 21 scanned the bottom. It found nothing. Analysis of the signals later suggested they were unlikely to be from the missing aircraft's locator beacons. They did not match the exact technical signature the way investigators would have expected. It was possible they came from some other source, or from damaged beacons behaving unpredictably. It was also possible they were just noise. By late April, the window for hearing fresh pings from healthy beacon batteries had almost certainly closed. The surface search for floating debris in the southern Indian Ocean was called off on the 28th of April. Aircraft had covered millions of square kilometers of ocean surface. They had seen driftwood, containers, fishing gear, and trash. Nothing they could prove belonged to Flight 370. The only path left was the hardest one, mapping the bottom of the ocean and searching it, slowly, strip by strip. There was a deeper problem hiding under all of this. No one really knew what the seafloor looked like in much of the target zone. On nautical charts, the area was just vague depth numbers and guesses. For a detailed, safe underwater search, that was not good enough. Submarines and towed sonar vehicles could not operate blind in complex mountainous terrain without risk of collision. So, before the full underwater search could begin, a different kind of ship moved in. Survey vessels started to run long tracks across the southern Indian Ocean with sonar aimed not at finding aircraft parts, but at measuring the shape of the seabed itself. They sent narrow beams of sound down and listened for echoes bouncing off ridges, plateaus, and trenches. Slowly, line by line, they built up a 3-dimensional map of the underwater landscape along and around the 7th Arc. That bathymetric survey would eventually cover more than 200,000 square kilometers of ocean floor. It revealed deep trenches, unexpected seamounts, and steep slopes. It also showed large plains where underwater search vehicles could operate more safely. From a storytelling perspective, this is one of the strangest parts of the MH370 case. A single missing aircraft forced countries to map huge areas of the planet that had never been charted properly before. The investigation was not just about what happened to one flight. It was literally redrawing our picture of the world beneath the waves. But the families of the people on board were not interested in new maps. They wanted one thing: proof of where the aircraft was and what had happened to the people they loved. That would require a different phase, the real underwater hunt. On the 29th of January, 2015, Malaysia formally declared the disappearance of Flight 370 an accident with no survivors. From a legal point of view, this step mattered. It allowed compensation claims to move forward. It gave families a framework in which to process estates, insurance, and official documents that required a clear status. From an emotional point of view, it felt brutal. There was still no aircraft, No flight data recorder, no cockpit voice recorder, no confirmed wreckage. The official line was effectively, "We have no idea exactly where it is or why it crashed, but it is gone and everyone on board is dead." For some families, this felt like being abandoned. For others, it was a painful but necessary formal recognition of what they had already accepted. The search at sea, however, continued. Ships kept scanning new strips of seabed in the southern Indian Ocean, expanding the coverage of the 120,000 square kilometer box. The paradox of MH370 in early 2015 was harsh. On paper, the case was now an accident. In reality, the investigation still looked very much like an unsolved missing persons file. That would change later that year, when something washed up on a beach thousands of kilometers away. By early 2015, the story of MH370 looks stuck. The southern Indian Ocean has been mapped and scanned for months. Ships have dragged sonar equipment across tens of thousands of square kilometers of seabed. Nothing. On paper, the aircraft is now officially classed as an accident with no survivors. In reality, investigators still do not know where it is. That changes when the ocean finally decides to give something back. It is the 29th of July 2015. On a quiet beach on Reunion Island in the western Indian Ocean, a man walking along the shore sees something large and strange in the surf. It is white, curved, about 2.5 meters long, and heavily barnacled. It looks like part of an aircraft wing. Reunion is a French territory, thousands of kilometers west of Australia and far from the official underwater search area. Locals call the authorities. Photos hit the internet. Within hours, aviation experts around the world are zooming in on those images. The shape is familiar. It is not just any wing part. It looks very much like a flaperon, a moving section on the trailing edge of the wing used to control roll and to add lift and drag on approach. And on a Boeing 777, that flaperon has internal markings. Inside this damaged piece are stenciled codes. When investigators open it up and check, they find a number that matters. 657 Bravo Bravo. That is the part number for the right flaperon of a Boeing 777. There is only one Boeing 777 that went missing in this part of the world, with no wreckage ever recovered. After detailed analysis in France, officials confirm it. The flaperon belongs to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. For the first time since March 2014, investigators are holding a physical piece of the aircraft in their hands. The disappearance is no longer just satellite arcs and sonar images. It is a torn, weathered wing section lying in a hangar. For the families, this moment is devastating and grounding at the same time. It proves that the aircraft did reach the Indian Ocean. It proves that it broke up. It proves that debris can drift thousands of kilometers and wash up more than a year later on distant shores. It does not, on its own, tell anyone exactly where the main wreckage is. Investigators study the flaperon in detail. They examine the way it has broken away from the wing, the damage to the hinges and fittings, the pattern of impact marks. They look at marine growth on the surface, the barnacles and other organisms that attach themselves while it floated. Some questions they ask: did this piece likely separate in the air or on impact with the water? Was it torn away with flaps extended or retracted? How long was it floating before it beached? What do the types and sizes of barnacles say about its time in the water and the temperatures it moved through? The answers are complex and sometimes disputed, even among experts. Many analysts conclude that the damage is more consistent with a high-energy impact into the sea rather than a gentle ditching. The flaperon does not look like a piece that simply broke off in a low-speed, controlled landing on water. But that still leaves a lot of room. A controlled descent flown to the end versus an uncontrolled spiral into the ocean would both involve high energies at the final moment. The flaperon alone cannot tell investigators exactly which one happened. What it does confirm, beyond any doubt, is that the aircraft ended in the ocean, and that the debris drift predictions from the earlier search were not fantasy. Modeling had suggested that if MH370 had crashed somewhere along the 7th arc in the southern Indian Ocean in March 2014, floating debris could, after 16 months, reach the western Indian Ocean. The flaperon appears on an island exactly where some of those models said it might. For the search teams, this is an important validation. They were looking in the right ocean. The question now is, were they looking in the right part of that ocean? The flaperon is not the last piece. Over the next 2 years, debris suspected, and in some cases confirmed, to be from MH370 begins washing up on beaches scattered across the Western Indian Ocean, Mauritius, Rodriguez, Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, South Africa. Some of these pieces are clearly from a Boeing 777, interior panels, a section of engine cowling with a faded logo, parts of the horizontal stabilizer. Many are small, battered, and heavily eroded, but a number of them are in good enough condition to carry manufacturer codes and part numbers. Teams from Malaysia, Australia, and other countries collect these fragments and send them for examination. Step by step, more items are confirmed as almost certainly or definitely from MH370. For the families, each confirmation hits like a delayed echo of the original loss. A wing part here, a cabin piece there, a torn fragment from the interior. Each one is proof that the aircraft broke apart, that it floated, that currents carried pieces into different corners of the Indian Ocean. For the scientists working on the search, the debris is something else as well: data. If you want to trace a debris item back to where it came from in the ocean, you have to understand currents, winds, and time. Researchers at organisations like the Australian National Science Agency take the debris finds and feed them into computer models. They start with when each piece was found, where it was found, and how long it could realistically survive floating before becoming too waterlogged or fouled to travel further. Then they run those backwards through ocean current models. They simulate virtual pieces of debris starting on different points along the 7th arc on the 8th of March 2014 and let them drift forwards in time in the model. They then compare where those simulated pieces end up after 16 months, 18 months, 2 years, with the real locations where debris was discovered. It is not an exact science. Ocean currents are messy. Winds can push floating debris in ways that are hard to model perfectly. Pieces that lie low in the water behave differently from those that sit higher. Some items may have been on the beach unseen for weeks before someone found them, so instead of a single point, drift analysis gives a probability map. It tells you which parts of the 7th arc are more likely to have been the origin of debris that matches what came ashore. In report after report, these models tend to favour a zone slightly north of the original high-priority area, but still along the same arc. That matters later when people ask whether the official underwater search in 2014 to 2017 spent too much time in the wrong sub-area of a very long line. For now, in 2015 and 2016, the drift work does two things. It confirms that MH370 almost certainly hit the water somewhere along the southern part of the 7th arc. It suggests that the highest probability region for the crash might not be exactly where search vessels have been spending most of their time. By mid-2016, underwater search vessels have scanned almost all of the 120,000 square kilometre area that Australia, Malaysia, and China agreed would be the official search zone. The sonar maps are incredibly detailed. The seabed is no longer an unknown landscape. It is a gallery of ridges, plains, and volcanic features. What is missing from that gallery is a Boeing 777. Each time ships finish a new strip of seabed, analysts check the data. Each small object that looks unusual is flagged, revisited, and re-imaged. None of these suspicious shapes has the size, form, or pattern of a large aircraft. As the end of the planned 120,000 square kilometers comes into view, the search team faces a hard reality. If the aircraft is not in this box, there are only two possibilities. It is outside the box in unsearched seabed along the 7th arc. Or the data used to define the arc is wrong in a way that no one has yet understood. In December 2016, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau publishes an update. Based on additional drift modelling and reanalysis of the satellite data, they identify a new area of roughly 25,000 square kilometres, just north of the original search zone, as the most likely region where MH370 may have ended. But there is a catch. The governments involved have already agreed that the official search will stop once the 120,000 square kilometre area is complete, unless there is compelling new evidence that pinpoints a much smaller, more precise location. A higher probability box is not enough on its own to restart a search that has already cost around $150 million and 3 years of work. The choice facing ministers in Malaysia, Australia, and China is brutal. Do they extend the search into the new recommended area, spending tens of millions more with no guarantee of success? Or do they stop?
And in the absence of credible new evidence, Australia, China, and Malaysia have collectively decided to suspend the search.
On the 17th of January 2017, the decision becomes public. Malaysia, Australia, and China announced that the underwater search for MH370 is suspended. They stress that this does not mean the case is closed. They say that if credible new evidence emerges pointing to a specific location, search operations can resume. But for the crews on the search vessels, it is simple. They are told to pack up their equipment, stow the sonar vehicles, and sail back to port. 3 years of continuous mapping and scanning ends without finding the main wreckage, the flight data recorder, or the cockpit voice recorder. The numbers are sobering. 120,000 square kilometers of seabed searched. Tens of thousands of square kilometers of surface water covered earlier. Dozens of debris items on far-off beaches. No aircraft on the bottom. For the families, this feels like a second loss. The first was the night the flight disappeared. The second is the moment the official search stops. Many relatives of the passengers issue statements calling the decision premature. They argue that the new 25,000 square kilometer area recommended by drift analysis should be searched. They are not alone. Some members of the original investigation team also publicly expressed disappointment that the search is ending just as the science is pointing to a refined zone. But without political will and funding, science does not move ships. For a while, it looks as if the story of MH370 will stay stuck there. An expensive, incomplete search, a long arc on a map, and a shelf full of reports. That changes when a private company makes an offer. In early 2018, a deep-sea exploration company called Ocean Infinity approaches the Malaysian government with a proposal. They want to search for MH370 in the revised high-probability area north of the original zone, and they are willing to take on the financial risk. The offer is simple in principle. No find, no fee. If they do not find the wreckage, Malaysia pays nothing. If they do, the contract allows for payment up to $70 million, depending on the circumstances and how quickly they succeed. From Malaysia's perspective, this is attractive. The country can show it is still committed to finding answers without immediately committing more public money to an uncertain search. The agreement is signed. The search is back on. Ocean Infinity charters a specialist vessel, the Seabed Constructor. On board, they carry a fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles, torpedo-shaped robots that can dive to 6,000 meters and scan large areas of seabed with high-resolution sonar. Unlike earlier methods where a ship towed one sonar vehicle on a cable, these robots can be launched in groups. Each one can run a pre-programmed search line, mapping the bottom independently while the mothership coordinates from above. This makes the search much faster. Ocean Infinity plans to focus first on the 25,000 square kilometer area identified in late 2016, then extend if time and conditions allow. Officially, they talk about 90 days of active searching, not counting time needed for resupply. In January 2018, Seabed Constructor arrives in the southern Indian Ocean and begins work. The company's robots fan out beneath the waves. They run parallel lines at a set height above the seabed, sending sonar pulses down and recording the echoes. On board the ship, analysts watch the data come in. The patterns are familiar by now: ridges, plains, steep slopes, and the occasional solitary boulder. Once again, every unusual contact is marked and checked. Ocean Infinity's technology allows them to cover huge areas quickly. Over the next months, they scan not only the original 25,000 square kilometer high probability zone, but also a significant additional area. By the time they are done, they have examined more than 100,000 square kilometers of seabed, much of it never seen in such detail before. They find shipwrecks. They find geological features no one had mapped. They do not find MH370. In June 2018, the search ends. The contract expires. The ship moves on to other projects. Malaysia confirms that no wreckage was located. For the second time in 4 years, a major underwater hunt, backed by careful analysis and expensive equipment, has come up empty. From a cold investigative perspective, this narrows the problem. If the satellite data is correct, and if the drift analysis is broadly right, then by mid-2018, the number of places where MH370 can still be hiding on the seabed is much smaller than it was in 2014. From an emotional perspective, it feels as though the mystery is deeper than ever. Now we have a confirmed wrecked flaperon and other debris proving a crash in the Indian Ocean. A well-defined seventh arc derived from satellite handshakes. A huge portion of that arc's seabed searched twice with no wreck found. With no new search underway, attention shifts to something else. If you cannot change the ocean, you change how you look at the data. That leads to the next big milestone in the MH370 story, the official Malaysian Safety Investigation Report. On the 2nd of July 2018, Malaysia releases a long-awaited document. the safety investigation report into Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. It runs to hundreds of pages. It covers the history of the flight, the performance of air traffic control, the technical status of the aircraft, the background checks on the captain and first officer, the analysis of satellite data and radar tracks, and a review of possible failure and hijack scenarios. Some of the key findings match what independent investigators have been saying for years. The report confirms that the aircraft diverted from its filed flight plan route soon after the last radio contact. The changes in track after the waypoint near the Vietnamese boundary are consistent with deliberate inputs on the flight deck, at least in the early phase. There is no evidence of a sudden catastrophic technical failure that alone could explain the entire sequence. The aircraft most likely ended in the southern Indian Ocean, along the 7th arc, after flying for hours beyond normal radar coverage. The report also highlights serious weaknesses in the response on the ground. It criticizes the slow reaction of air traffic control units in both Malaysia and Vietnam in the crucial minutes after the transponder return disappeared. Controllers assumed for too long that the other side was in contact. There was confusion over responsibilities, and key escalation steps were delayed. Those delays did not cause the disappearance, but they did mean that search and rescue assets were not put in motion as quickly as they should have been. On the question everyone cares about most, why the aircraft diverted and who, if anyone, was responsible, the report stops short of a conclusion. Investigators go through the captain's and first officer's backgrounds, their training, medical history, financial situation, personal lives, social media, and home flight simulator. They find nothing that amounts to a clear motive or a proven plan to take the aircraft. They examine the cargo manifest, including lithium batteries and other items that had raised suspicion in public discussion. They find no evidence that any specific cargo caused a fire or catastrophic event early in the flight. They consider hijack scenarios, including the possibility of a hidden third party taking control of the cockpit, but find no confirming evidence of that either. The head of the investigation team stands at a press conference and says the line that sums it up. In conclusion, the team is unable to determine the real cause of the disappearance of MH370. The report does make recommendations. It calls for improvements in how aircraft are tracked over oceanic regions, better coordination between air traffic control centers when a flight goes missing, longer cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder capacities, and stronger requirements for independent position reporting over open ocean. In other words, it tries to make sure that the next MH370 does not happen in silence. But it does not give the families what they wanted most. It does not tell them why their relatives never came home. By the end of 2018, the story of MH370 has entered a strange phase. Officially, the disappearance is an accident with no survivors. 2 major underwater searches have failed to find the wreck. A long, detailed safety report has been published with no firm cause, and no further large-scale search is underway. Unofficially, the work has not stopped. Independent researchers continue to study the satellite data, the radar returns, and the debris. New drift models are published. Alternative reconstructions of the final flight path are proposed, some only small variations on the official view, others more radical. Some focus on the idea that one of the pilots deliberately flew the aircraft into a remote part of the ocean. Others push mechanical or electrical failure theories that would have left the aircraft on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. Some speculate about hijack or remote interference. Without the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, none of these theories can be confirmed. The only way to break the deadlock is to find the aircraft. But searching millions of square kilometers of ocean is not something independent enthusiasts can do from laptops. It takes ships, robots, and money. For several years after 2018, MH370 lives in this tension. Enough data to know roughly where it should be. Too much uncertainty to justify government spending another $100 million on another wide search. That stalemate holds until something else changes. Not in the data, but in technology and in how a new generation of investigators combines different signals. By the end of 2018, MH370 looks like a story frozen in place. 2 massive searches have failed. The official report has admitted what nobody wanted to hear. We do not know the real cause, and we do not know exactly where the aircraft is. On paper, the case is complete. In reality, it is anything but. Because while the ships go home, something else happens. The data does not stop talking. Behind the scenes, a new phase of the investigation is starting. Not in the southern Indian Ocean, but on computer screens, in research labs, and in the homes of engineers and pilots who cannot let this go. 5 years after the disappearance, the families of the passengers gather again. They bring photos of loved ones, candles, and banners with one demand that has not changed since 2014. Please do not close the book. At an anniversary event in Malaysia, the Transport Minister says something important. He promises that the government will not consider MH370 a finished case. If anyone can present new and credible information that points to a specific area where the aircraft might be, Malaysia will seriously consider authorizing a new search. That phrase, new and credible information, becomes the key. It is not enough to say, search again. It needs to be, search here for this reason. For the families, that statement is both a reassurance and a challenge. The governments will not spend another $100 million on a vague hope. So the pressure shifts back to the researchers. Can anyone squeeze more out of the data we already have? Can anyone refine the crash location enough to justify sending ships back out? In the years after the official report, the MH370 case develops a second life online. Pilots, engineers, mathematicians, satellite specialists, oceanographers, even radio amateurs, they all take passes at the same puzzle. Some efforts are careful, disciplined, and deeply technical. Others drift into speculation and conspiracy. Most serious independent work focuses on 3 big evidence streams. 1. Satellite handshakes, trying new ways of modeling speed, altitude, and heading changes. 2. Drift analysis, using more refined ocean models and the growing list of debris finds. 3. Radar and performance, checking that any suggested path actually fits what is known from the early part of the flight. With time, another possible source of information begins to emerge from an unexpected place, a worldwide network of weak radio signals. Long before MH370, radio amateurs around the world built a system with a very specific purpose. It is called Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. The idea is simple. Small radio stations transmit faint signals on known frequencies. Other stations around the world listen, record what they hear, and log the time and strength of each signal. Most of the time, this is used to study how radio waves bounce and bend around the planet. But there is another side effect. Anything that passes between a transmitter and receiver, mountains, storms, or even an aircraft, can slightly disturb the signal. Over time, these disturbances are recorded in a huge database. The exact location suggested is in the southern Indian Ocean, on or near the already famous 7th Arc, but not in the areas that were searched in 2014 to 2018. Instead, it points to a different section of that arc, further along, in deeper water. For some people, this is the credible new information politicians were talking about in 2019. For others, it is simply too experimental. They argue that amateurs around the world radio signals were not designed to track aircraft, that the noise in the system is too high, and that any path constructed from them is too uncertain to bet a new search on. What matters for the story is this. By 2022, there is at least one detailed technical report arguing that MH370 likely lies in a particular segment of the southern Indian Ocean that has not been mapped by sonar yet, and that it is worth going back to look. That report does not convince everyone, but it reaches the one group who can actually act on it, a company that has already searched for MH370 once before. Ocean Infinity, the deep-sea exploration company that ran the private search in 2018, has not forgotten MH370. By 2022, they have new tools. Instead of a single large vessel with a crew launching robots over the side, they are developing a fleet of leaner, more advanced robotic ships designed to operate with very few people on board. Each of those ships can carry multiple autonomous underwater vehicles and cover large areas of seabed more efficiently. Publicly, the company says it is willing to return to the MH370 search. They believe their improved technology, combined with refined analysis of the satellite, drift, and radio data, can give them a better shot at finding the wreck. Privately, they begin to work with independent analysts to narrow down a new search box, a region of around 15,000 square kilometers, much smaller than the original 120,000 square kilometer government search zone. On paper, this new box has several advantages. It sits along the 7th Arc in a section that fits the satellite timings and frequency shifts. It lines up with the debris drift models as a highly likely origin area for the pieces washed up in Africa and island chains. It overlaps with the path proposed by some of the WSPR radio analysis, clustering around a specific final turn and descent scenario. In other words, it is not based on just one idea, but on multiple independent lines of reasoning that point to roughly the same part of the ocean. The problem is not technical, It is political. Ocean Infinity cannot simply go out and search anytime it wants. It needs Malaysia's permission and ideally formal backing if there is to be any official conclusion. That brings the story to the next crucial date. On the 9th anniversary of the disappearance, Malaysia's transport minister faces questions again. Will there be another search? He does not promise anything concrete, but he repeats an important line. Malaysia will not close the book on MH370. If someone can present solid evidence for a likely crash location along the 7th arc, the government is prepared to consider a new mission. By now, that someone is effectively Ocean Infinity, supported by independent analysts. They refine their proposal, they gather their data, they send technical packages and presentations to the Malaysian government. The case for a new search is no longer just about emotion and closure, it is also about technology and probability. If a private company is willing to go on a no find, no fee basis, and target a much smaller region that multiple studies point to as the most likely impact zone, then the political cost of saying no starts to rise. The 10th anniversary is approaching, public interest is going to spike again. Governments know they will have to answer, in front of cameras, whether they are doing anything new. 10 years after MH370 vanished, the story returns to front pages and primetime documentaries. Special reports revisit the night of the disappearance, the first chaotic searches in the South China Sea, the long months in the southern Indian Ocean, the finding of debris on faraway beaches, and the empty sonar maps. Families gather again, this time marking a full decade without answers. Some of them call for a permanent memorial at a defined site, a dedicated international protocol for long-haul flights over remote oceans, and renewed commitment to finding the wreck, not just talking about it every March. In interviews, the Malaysian Transport Minister repeats the same position. The country is open to a new search if a strong, evidence-based proposal is on the table. By this point, that proposal exists. Ocean Infinity has formally approached Malaysia with a plan. A targeted search of around 15,000 square kilometers in the southern Indian Ocean, guided by refined satellite, drift and radio analysis, conducted with the latest generation of autonomous underwater vehicles, and offered under the same basic deal as 2018, no find, no fee. Under that deal, if they fail, Malaysia does not pay. If they succeed, they receive a success fee that can reach tens of millions of dollars, depending on how quickly and clearly they locate the wreck. The decision is now squarely in the hands of the Malaysian cabinet. By the end of 2024, the direction is clear. Malaysian officials signal that they intend to move forward with Ocean Infinity's proposal. Details of the contract are discussed, including the size and boundaries of the search area. The principle remains the same. The search must be scientific, targeted, and based on the best available analysis, not on random speculation. For the families, this is the first truly hopeful news in years. A new search means fresh data, better technology, and a chance, even if small, that the recorders and key wreckage will finally be found. After more than a decade, MH370 might not stay a question mark on a map forever. In early 2025, the Malaysian government confirms that an agreement with Ocean Infinity is in place. The new mission will focus on a 15,000 square kilometer area in the southern Indian Ocean, operate for a defined period using a fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles, and pay the company only if they actually detect the wreckage of MH370. One of Ocean Infinity's robotic-capable ships heads south towards the search zone. On board, multiple underwater vehicles equipped with high-resolution sonar, improved navigation systems, and better data processing equipment than the systems used in 2014 to 2018. Compared to the first search for MH370, the approach is different in two important ways. First, the maps are already good. The huge bathymetric survey done for the original search means the new mission does not have to start by mapping basic seabed shape. That work is done. The team can go straight to high-resolution scanning of promising areas. Second, the technology has matured. Autonomous vehicles can now stay down longer, cover more ground per day, and return higher quality imagery of the seabed. Data analysis pipelines have been refined by years of searching for shipwrecks and even missing submarines in other parts of the world. When the search begins, there is a surge of cautious optimism. If MH370 is in that 15,000 square kilometer box, and if it is not buried deep under mud or broken into pieces too small to distinguish from rocks, this mission has a better chance than any before it of finding it. The southern Indian Ocean does not care about anniversaries or contracts. By early April 2025, conditions in the search area deteriorate. Autumn in the southern hemisphere is rolling in, swells increase, storm systems sweep through. Operating sophisticated underwater vehicles in those conditions is risky. Sonar tows and autonomous craft need stable speeds and depths. Heavy seas can make launches unsafe and can disrupt the fine control needed for accurate scanning. Malaysia's transport minister announces that the search is being suspended due to bad weather and seasonal limits. Ocean Infinity has already spent weeks on site. They have scanned sections of the target area, but the mission has not yet produced a confirmed contact that looks like MH370. Crucially, the suspension is not the same as cancellation. The mission is paused, not abandoned. The company intends to resume when conditions improve, and both sides still expect the main phase of the search to continue once the southern oceans are calmer. That next window is at the end of the year. By late 2025, the case of MH370 has been unsolved for more than 11 years. But it is not buried. Malaysia formally announces that the search will resume on the 30th of December 2025. Ocean Infinity will return to the southern Indian Ocean and conduct a new concentrated search of the high probability zone for a total of around 55 days of active operations. This time, everyone goes in with a clearer understanding of what is at stake. For the families, this may be the last realistic chance in the near future to locate the aircraft and recover recorders while they are still potentially readable. For investigators, it is the opportunity to test, in the real world, more than a decade of modelling. The accuracy of the satellite handshake arc, the power of long-term drift analysis, and the value, if any, of radio signal work like WSPR in refining flight paths. For Ocean Infinity, it is a test of their technology and of the idea that deep-sea search can be done faster, smarter, and more cheaply by robot fleets. For aviation as a whole, it is a question of principle. Can a wide-body jet with 239 people on board truly disappear in the age of satellites and worldwide connectivity? Or can human persistence and technology eventually close even this kind of gap? The search area is still huge by normal standards. 15,000 square kilometers is larger than some countries, but compared to the vastness of the Indian Ocean, it is a focused, specific box, chosen after 11 years of looking at the same night from every possible angle. So, after all the reports, searches, and theories, what do we actually know by late 2025? We know that MH370 took off normally from Kuala Lumpur in March 2014 and made routine contact with air traffic control. Shortly after its last voice transmission, its transponder and normal data links were disabled, and the aircraft turned off its planned route. Military radar tracked it back across Malaysia and then out over the Andaman Sea at altitudes and speeds that point to deliberate control. Satellite handshakes show that it flew for hours more, ending somewhere along a curved line, the 7th arc, in the southern Indian Ocean. Debris, confirmed as belonging to a Boeing 777 from MH370, has washed up on multiple shores of the western Indian Ocean, consistent with a crash along that arc. 2 large underwater searches, one government-led and one private, have scanned more than 200,000 square kilometers of seabed and still not found the wreck. A combination of new analysis methods, improved drift modeling, refined satellite data work, and experimental radio signal techniques now points to a smaller, more specific target area than before. A fresh, focused 55-day search is scheduled to begin at the very end of 2025. Conducted by a company that specializes in deep-sea robotics under a no-find, no-fee agreement. What we still do not know is the hardest part. We do not have the flight data recorder. We do not have the cockpit voice recorder. We do not know what was said or not said in that cockpit after the last good night. We do not know exactly who programmed the turns or why. Airlines now face tighter rules on how often aircraft must report their position over oceanic routes. There is more emphasis on systems that automatically send distress information if something abnormal happens on board. International bodies have pushed for longer flight recorder durations and, in some proposals, deployable or streaming data options so that key information is not lost underwater. Finding MH370 would allow investigators to test whether those changes are enough or whether there is still more to learn. It would answer specific questions. Did the aircraft end in a steep uncontrolled dive or in a more controlled descent? Were there signs of fire, decompression, or structural failure? Did the flight computers record deliberate changes in heading and altitude at key moments? Was there any indication of a struggle in the cockpit Those answers would not change what happened to the 239 people on board, but they would change how we protect the next 239. Most accident documentaries can close with a line like, "Because of this tragedy, the following changes were made, and we now know exactly what happened." MH370 is different. This is an investigation that, even after 11 years, is still live. As the new search ships head back into the southern Indian Ocean at the end of 2025, the case stands on a knife edge. For now, all we can say with certainty is this: MH370 vanished from the sky. But for the families, the flight never ended. Every day still waits for answers that may never come.
What happened to Flight 370 may still be unresolved, but the evidence is no longer static, and neither is the investigation. If you want to follow future updates and long-form investigations like this, subscribe to the channel.